Hello everyone. My name is Yash Gupta and I'm a second year undergrad student in the National Institute of Technology Karnataka Surathkal. I'm in the Information Technology department. So one of my non-technical hobbies is playing football and actually watching football as well. So because of my keen interest in football, I think I really like FIFA and I can spend hours on FIFA. Like I've played every single FIFA title since like the 98 one.
So the reason I chose this topic for today is because industry is looking for full stack developers. Now the question is, what are full stack developers, right? So full stack developers are people who can work on the front end, back end, and the database. So that's really crucial. The reason industries are looking for people like this is because having three different people also it includes to having a lot of employees in your office and people looking to cut that down. Also, many a times you'll have to coordinate between three different teams for a different front end, back end, etc. development, right? So nowadays teams do not want that. All they want is like a team where a person has knowledge about all three, and that really helps them out. So that's the reason industry is looking for a lot of full stack developers these days. And I personally feel starting off with the back end is a good way of going about to become a full stack developer. So that's the reason I feel that this introduction will be useful. Okay, so now I just want to take you back to probably the first website that was made. So this is the www website that was initially created. And on the right side, you can see a Logitech site. I just like the site, so I put up the page. So you can see the vast difference between the two. So the one on the left is actually just raw HTML. So if any of you are actually have knowledge about HTML, you know that without any styling and stuff like that, that's how the page looks. But I feel that we've advanced so much in the field that you can see it on the right side. So the image on the right side actually shows how advanced web technology has become and how the field has grown, which also makes a new developer like me feel like there is so much more for me to do in this particular field. So that actually motivates me at times to actually push the field forward maybe. And yeah, I think it's a great feeling as a web developer. So next we'll move on to, yeah, so how I started web development. All right. So last year around the same time, I was probably doing an internship somewhere else. Okay. So at that office, I had to work with the UI UX development for their website. And while I was actually creating different front ends and thinking of what the user wants and stuff like that, I got this feeling like I want to code this too, because just being a UI UX developer is nice. I mean, that's a great job too. But many a times I feel like what I'm actually imagining, I'd like to make it too. So that's when I'm like, okay, I should start coding too. So when I start coding, I was told to start with the basics, and I suggest that the same for all of y'all also. So please start off with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I think those are the building blocks for any web development or web project. So it's essential that you learn those. So yeah, that's particularly how I started. So once I actually understood the basics of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and I could do some front end. So the next step to become a full stack developer, I felt, was to learn a backend. So that's when I went for Django. So if many of you all may know that Django is very famous these days and it's written in Python. So I started off with Django, and it's a full framework and uses MTV. I'll describe all of that a little later. So I really like Django, and I worked with Django for quite a while. In fact, the project that I built for the Imagineer Makeathon was actually built on Django. So Django is very useful, and I've been using Django for quite some time. And I felt that it was really nice. And so I just continued. I learned a couple of front-end frameworks as well, like Angular and React. And I think those are pretty good too. I'll get into that a little later. So after when I actually joined for this internship at FluxGen, that's when Ganesh sir had asked us to look at different web development tools and see what suits the project that we're going to work on. So I was like, okay, sir, I will look into it. So that's when I did a detailed research and I actually started looking into Node, and I learned Node, and then I learned React. And I honestly feel that Node is really nice, and I feel like we should actually use Node. So I'll get into the comparison a little later. So that's how I went about web development. And I think you can follow the same path where you can start with HTML, CSS, move on to a backend, and then probably a front end. So next up, we'll just understand the difference between front end and back end. So front end is basically whatever you see on the screen, all of your user interface and stuff. Okay, so like this iceberg, like whatever is on the top and you can see is all the front end, whereas the back end is all the logic, your DBMS, your database management, your authentication, all of that is done on the back end. So as you can see, backend is more of sort of, like the major intense work that you do is all done on the backend. So now a common question that will arise is how do you connect these two? So yeah, that in the middle, if you can see, there's an API. So to explain API in layman terms is just basically like if you go to a restaurant, there comes a waiter, right? Once you're sitting and waiting. So you give him the order, he goes back to the kitchen, gives it to the chef. And once he gives it to the chef prepares something, gives it back to the waiter, and then he comes back to you, right? So that's literally how API works. So if your front end sends, a request, your back end actually processes it and then sends back the response. And that's pretty much what the API does. So I hope you have a clear understanding of what the difference between front end and back end is. And the reason we do all of this on the back end, the data management and user authentication is because your front end is exposed to the user. So while building something, please make sure that you do not expose any sensitive data. So that's the reason we have backend to do all of that, because that's always on a server and it's kept separate from the whole, whatever the user can see. All right, so we'll just move on to choosing the correct tech stack. So this is very vital because if you're actually starting, you need to know where to start from. So that's where you choose your correct tech stack. So two very famous tech stacks right now are like, the Mern and Django. So Node is actually a part of, the JavaScript part of it, which is like Mern, Mean, Maven, etc. So Node works on JavaScript, as I mentioned, and Django is on Python. So if you're actually adept with any of these languages, you can actually choose based on that. But there are various other reasons to choose any of these backends too. So Django is very nice, and I feel it's beautiful for a very large scale application. But if you're making a smaller application, I suggest using Node. Also, Django is monolithic. What I mean by monolithic is that it uses only a single tier. That means that all of your front end, back end, and database is kind of handled by the same application. Whereas when you're using Node, you actually have to use a different front end, whether it is HTML, CSS, or React or Angular. And the reason I think you should keep it as separate blocks is because many a times technology actually gets outdated, right? So maybe my backend like Node is still in the market and it's still running well, but I want to change my front end like Angular or React. So now if I have it as separate components, I can easily switch, Angular with React without having to change my backend. Nowadays, Django also has Django REST, but I feel this is much easier and the three-tier architecture is much easier for using Node. That's particularly why I like Node. And I suggest if you're a beginner to start off with Node because Node is much easier to understand as well compared to Django. Django has a lot of good features to use if you're making a huge application because Django has a lot of authentication and stuff which is already predefined and done within Django, even callbacks. But I particularly like Node. So if you're actually a newcomer, you can use Node because you'd have to learn only one language, which is JavaScript, because your front end, back end, and your database all run on Node. So I particularly feel Node has an advantage there, although Django is a beautiful framework as well. So that's pretty much about the choosing your correct tech stack. And then once you choose a tech stack, I think it's important to understand what the different databases are for you to, pick something out. So there are actually two types of databases, which is SQL and NoSQL. So in your SQL, everything is in the form of relational data, and all of them are like related to each other and have a very defined schema. Whereas in NoSQL, it's more of a free flow structure with documentation. So in SQL, you can actually imagine, like an Excel sheet where you have tables and columns and rows and you have to fill each row. Whereas in SQL, NoSQL, you can have, like varying data. You can have more properties and some can have lesser in some. So I feel NoSQL is more free like that, but many a times you want the rigid structure. So that's where you use SQL. Also, NoSQL is faster than, let's say SQL. So that's another advantage. If you have to constantly query the database, many a times companies use NoSQL. So both of them have their pros and cons, and actually companies these days are using both simultaneously for some kind of data. So that's how you go about the databases. You can use Mongo for NoSQL and probably MySQL and stuff for SQL, which is very good and popular right now. So easy references for you to get started. I particularly feel that you should start off with HTML and CSS. That's why I mentioned that please do visit the W3 School site. It is a wonderful site to get started with HTML and CSS and JavaScript. If you want to go about Django, you can use Django Girls. So Django Girls is this tutorial kind of based thing where you can learn Django. And I think the documentation of there is excellent and it's very concise. And for Node.js, there are a lot of good Udemy courses. That's where I learned my Node.js from, but you can also refer to a couple of YouTube links. I will put all of that in the description.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe and click on the bell button as to not miss out any content. Contact us here.